Before I talk about the bosses, I think I should make it clear that I'm not pursuing an objective ranking of the bosses. Nioh 2 has a ton of different playstyle and build varieties, and those dictate how you'll experience the bosses. I'm just ranking them based on how much I enjoy them with my playstyle. And those bosses will be mainly from the main missions, DLC included, but I'll also include notable side mission fights. Emphasis on notable because there's lots of uninteresting human bosses that I don't see the point in ranking. I'll also have the bosses in tiers, which will be bad, which is for bosses that are around 3 to 4 out of 10, mediocre, which is for 4 to 5 out of 10 bosses, decent for 5 to 6 out of 10, good for 6 to 7, great for 7 to 8 out of 10, and amazing for 8 all the way up to 10. So, let's begin. Despite being a side mission and an optional boss, this is a notable boss. Notable for being fucking trash. Nioh has rarely dabbled in gank boss fights, and after experiencing Gozuki and Mizuki, all I can say is good. They just took two existing bosses and put them together, because their names rhymed. They're very obviously not designed to work together, it's just a complete mess of two independent AIs. It doesn't help that both are massive, so it can be a clusterfuck for the camera. The only strategy there is to kill the other one as fast as you can, so you can turn the fight back to being a one-on-one. Don't get me wrong, this fight isn't ridiculously hard, it's actually quite easy because of how little health they have. But that won't save this fight. It's bullshit and horseshit. Thanks, game. This fucking guy. He's just annoying. I think his damage is stupidly high considering how quick he is. I hate how he destroys your key in a single hit. His gun spam is more annoying than fun, and his Guardian Spirit move of summoning fireballs just keeps you away from him, and I don't like that. And every single one of those fireballs always stagger me, so if I get hit by one, I'll be sitting there for the rest of it. And it's completely up to RNG how often he does it. Sometimes he just keeps spamming it, the dickhead. There's nothing of value for me in this encounter. It's not an original boss, he's been taken from Nioh 1 and made worse. The music is also copy-pasted, and it doesn't seem anything of consequence happens when you do beat him. So what was even the point of it? At least it's not the final boss of this level, so the end fight can still redeem the mission. Oh. That final boss would be Kyuki. I guess fuck this mission then. Nioh 2 brings back a handful of Nioh 1 bosses, and some of them they did genuine improvements on. Magoichi not so much, and Onryoki even less so. I'm not sure they changed anything other than make some of his attacks be susceptible to burst counters. Thing is, I like Nioh 1 Onryoki, at least the first time you fight him. By the 5th time it gets old. But initially he's the first proper boss you fight. By that point you won't have the best mobility or understanding of the game mechanics, so he's well balanced for that. But in Nioh 2 he shows up rather late game, and he's just not fit for it. Thanks to burst counters being able to restore your ki and yokai abilities filling in what little downtime you'd have after being out of ki, Nioh 2 is even faster paced than the first game. And Onryoki just can't keep up, he's a complete joke. Kyuki continues the trend of giant Nioh bosses looking intimidating, but being some of the easiest bosses in the game. Just staying near the boss, around the side of it, and occasionally dodging the leg stomps is really all it takes to achieve victory. Your biggest concern isn't the boss in that case, but the camera, which can sometimes have a tough time adjusting to the size of the boss. It's especially awkward to try to go for the weak spot on his legs because of this. I just don't think Kyuki has anything interesting to offer besides a little bit of cool factor, I guess. I mean, I'm not sure if he looks more silly or terrifying. Not quite as bad as the original depictions of Kyuki though. I mean, what the fuck is this? Lady Osakabe has got great visuals, but that's about it. It's a living monster castle, and yet the entire fight is just you fighting the same tentacle over and over again. Even when the boss activates Dark Realm, they're still the same. They don't do much else than occasionally flail around and spew magic at you. The magic type varies, but that doesn't change anything, because the way you avoid them is still always the same. The only bit of challenge in this fight is the projectiles coming from off-screen. It's basically just up to luck if they happen to be coming at you at a bad time. I'm kinda able to dodge them consistently, since they're pretty slow and if you have the game volume up, you can hear them. I think they should have still made them more audible or positioned the tentacles differently. It's a shame this boss sucks, because this mission would probably be otherwise my favorite in the game. Unlike Onryoki, Giant Toad has seen lots of changes. He's definitely better suited for the pace of Nioh 2, but the problem is that those changes don't make the fight more fun. but rather more frustrating. RNG is the biggest issue for me. Sometimes he's pretty chill and mainly does his melee attacks, and other times he litters the whole arena to the point where there's no room to move in. I don't mind the bombs, but when he starts putting down poison, paralysis, and caltrops that slow you down, it's a fucking fuckfest by that point. It's a much harder fight than the original in Nioh 1, but not really for the right reasons. It's a shame, because I like the original Giant Toad, and they could have made it even better in Nioh 2. I hardly ever remember anything about this fight after it's done. It just feels like a glorified revenant, not a boss, which is a shame considering how significant he is to the story and how much they hype him up. I also don't like how he uses the same yokai shift as the player, since they're not really designed to be enemies. They're too fast and spammy for that, I feel, with the exception of the Brute. But he can use 2 different yokai forms, which will be the 2 that you didn't pick at the start of the game. So if you picked Brute, which is the only one that's easy to fight against, you're kinda fucked. And even if you picked something else, it's still up to RNG which of the 2 he'll use. I get they wanted to make it feel like you're fighting a version of yourself since this guy is supposed to be your twin, but I already feel that way every time I fight a Revenant. This fight is okay, I guess. It functions and isn't riddled with terrible mechanics, but I just can't say I ever find it fun. I find the constant jumping around to be more of a nuisance than a challenge. Dark Realm Face doesn't really spice things up in an interesting way, and I don't like how often he forces you away from him by summoning web at his feet. And worst of all, he humiliates Yorimitsu, who is a far better boss. Like, this lady was mopping the floor with me and you just one-shot her? Fuck off! Also, we're in the mediocre tier, so, as the name suggests, these bosses are going to be mediocre instead of bad. Improvement, yippee! Tatarimaki used to be around the middle of the ranking, but over time I've started to enjoy the gimmick less and less. The bird by itself is okay, but when it summons the red orb that shoots projectiles at you, it's a needless headache. It's all up to luck if you'll have an easy time destroying it, or if the owl will get in your way and complicate things. Plus, I don't like how it spends half the fight in the air, and even when it is on the ground, it's nothing to write home about. It's not bad, but the coolness factor has worn out for me, and all I'm left with is a painfully mediocre boss. Gozuki is the second enemy you'll face in the game, and I think it's a memorable encounter. It's most likely going to be too tough for you to beat it on your first playthrough, so you're advised to run away. But it feels great to beat it on subsequent playthroughs, even if it does take a long while to do so and starts to drag by the end. Because as a boss fight, he's not too great. Just extremely basic and not as elaborate as Mizuki. That's not to say I want to fight him along with Mizuki. No thanks. I'll make this very brief, because this fight is very brief. I like his attacks, especially when he uses Living Weapon, he's got some cool abilities. Too bad he never gets to show them for longer than 30 seconds, because that's how quickly he goes down. What a shame, considering he's one of the better bosses in the first game. I was looking forward to fighting Nobunaga in his prime, but, well, I think this clip speaks for itself. This is just fucking sad. Guys like Toshie are why I didn't want to include all the human side mission bosses, because they're all the same as this guy. They might use different weapons, but ultimately it feels the same. They can be a little bit of fun, but nothing in comparison to most yokai bosses. But occasionally it can be refreshing to fight them after dealing with countless yokai, since you do fight them very differently. Unlike yokai, all human bosses can block your attacks, and their ki diminishes and replenishes at roughly the same rate as the players. With some weapons it's easier to break their ki than others, like the Odachi for example is completely broken in that regard. On top of that, if you deplete their ki once, you can kinda get them stuck in a loop where they can't recover. So for that, humans tend to be a bit unbalanced as bosses. And notice how I haven't mentioned a single thing about Toshie's moveset, because there isn't really anything interesting there. I guess I like that he's mobile, and he's definitely not Saikama Goichi, so that's always good. I'm slightly biased against this boss because him and his fucking projectiles throughout half the level makes this one of my least favorite missions. But I'm always relieved when I do get to the boss because it's a complete cakewalk in comparison. I do like a few things here, like how you can use his own body as cover from the laser attack, and interrupting his moves using the Brute Burst counter feels satisfying. And after getting pummeled for the entire mission, it's very gratifying to just unleash everything on his fingers and break them into pieces. But other than that, the boss is just a bit too slow-paced and unthreatening to ever get exciting for me. I like William just for the concept of fighting the protagonist of the first game as a boss. And while I have PTSD from Nioh bosses that use living weapon buffs to become ridiculously overpowered, I don't mind so much with William since he's a very brief fight anyway. But there's the problem, it's usually over in less than a minute. I'm not sure if they made him so easy to showcase how powerful he is, or to insult how bad us players were in Nioh 1, or if they just didn't realize how weak this boss is. So, the setup is nice, but come on, you guys did William dirty. If we just consider Doman as phase 1 to Lightning Gods of Yomi, sure, he's fine. But since you get a checkpoint in between them, I'll consider them separate bosses. In which case, he's pathetic. I have no idea why they decided to give him a unique soundtrack and not Lightning Gods, because besides the music, there's really nothing that original about him. He just casts your typical Nioh spells and that's about it. His offense is kinda weak, and his defense even more so. Breaking his ki is way too easy and he doesn't have the health to survive it. But I can't say I hate his fighting mechanics, they're completely fine, just not very interesting. Our first decent tier entry is yet another typical human. However, I think him being an early game boss and the first human boss makes him a more welcome sight than some of the others. And I do kind of enjoy it still. Maybe it's the setting with the mud and the rain, I always like that. I also like how if you're far away he'll point his bow at the sky to fire a volley, but if you get close to him while he's in that animation he can switch to aiming it directly at you. But ultimately, he's not the most memorable foe you'll encounter. Although he's a yokai, Hachisuka Koroku doesn't feel any different from most human bosses. He does activate Dark Realm like other yokai, but his only added attack as far as I can tell is his ability to briefly summon Kamaitachi. A boss I would rather be fighting over him, but still I think he's pretty enjoyable to fight. Usually I hate Kusarigama wielding enemies, but he's not too obnoxious about it. He's easy and not remarkable, but it's a fine mid-level boss. I have to give Toshimitsu some credit for being one of the harder human bosses early game, but he's still a human boss and has human boss weaknesses, which is, again, the imbalance. Toshimitsu is no different, but if he does get the chance to fight back, he's fucking relentless. He just doesn't stop attacking! And if he does, it's only so he can cast a spell at you or buff himself. And near the end of the fight he gets very intimidating with those burst attacks. So I do like how he mixes up melee attacks with magic, and how he's difficult, but with him being a human, I'll still take most good yokai fights over him. Sorry, I'm racist. I was surprised to find a completely unique yokai boss from a random side mission, but I'll take it. Even if it is clear why she was never used as a main mission boss. But I do like how she's the only yokai boss that uses unarmed martial arts and feels closer to human than yokai. She also throws me off with how quick her burst attacks are. In general, she's one of the fastest bosses in the game, so be sure to use low stance as much as possible. Her attack patterns aren't anything too amazing, but I like when she summons clones of herself to attack you, kind of like Kashin Koji, but far less deadly. Overall, decent. Nioh had the potential to be a good tier boss, but I find it disappointing how much the fight is just a slightly different Umibozu from the previous game. When he jumps onto the platform, the fight is so much better. It's actually pretty fun, I like the animations, the attack patterns are deceptive, I like how tight the timing on dodging the laser is, the lightning AoEs mix in nicely, but then it's over before you know it and he's back in the water and back to being a boring boss. I like the statue head inside the body of water, it looks cool, and the music is nice, but I think they should have put more emphasis on the ground battle with the boss. That's where the real fight is. I've always had a strange relationship with this boss. The first time I played, it used to be my most hated fight in the game, but during the same playthrough I started to warm up to it. I think it's just a very sudden difficulty spike in the early game. He becomes far easier later on when you fight him again in the Golden Castle, but for the third boss in the game he's quite demanding. If you fail to cut off the snake arms in the first phase, the Dark Realm is utter chaos. It's pretty annoying chasing after the little snakes when they're evasive and you have the boss itself trying to kill you, but I like that it rewards you if you did well in phase 1 and killed both snakes. There's also the burst counters that are really satisfying. I like destroying the crystal on his head, and I enjoy how different it feels from the rest of the bosses. Also, I know I've been mentioning difficulty a lot in this video, and don't get me wrong, I don't think an easy boss is necessarily bad or a hard boss good. I just like when it's difficult enough that you have to pay attention. Nioh comes back from the first game, but with the few changes made to him, I label him as Nioh. He was kind of a mediocre boss before, no matter how many times he was reused, but I think they finally got it right. It's been a while since I played Nioh 1, so I can't comment on all the changes, and that's not really the point anyway. I'm trying to rank each boss in their own merit, regardless if they're refights or not, and I think objectively Nioh is a good boss. Especially his burst attack from the air, it feels so good countering it. Other than that, it's a pretty basic moveset, but it works. While I don't like how the boss fight is presented, it just comes out of nowhere and feels like a pointless repeat of what happened in the first game, the fight still is a treat. Like Nioh, I appreciate the new burst attacks he has, his are great as well. Again, can't compare too much to the original since I don't remember all of it, but I could swear he's way more aggressive. He also seems to have more variety in his eye lasers. I also like his tail as a weak spot, and his animations, like in the first game, are still cool. Story-wise, it seems like a completely pointless boss fight, but I'm happy to have it because it's a good boss. Mizuki is a rarely well done tutorial boss. Usually they're uninteresting with little challenge to offer and are there just to show the mechanics or to look cool and make you feel like a badass for beating it. But this horsefuck holds nothing back. You'll have to either adapt or die trying. I don't think it's too ridiculously hard for beginners though, it's still easy in comparison to most bosses. I think they did a great job making him a good learning tool and a fun, engaging boss at the same time. Still, even though he's a tough first boss, after time he becomes less exciting than a lot of the others ahead of him. This guy is definitely one of the hardest human bosses in the game, as was intended, but I still don't think it's as hard as they wanted. It seemed like they wanted him to be some sort of super boss, the ultimate challenge. And in some ways he is. His super quick dashes through the air with different variations in speed and range definitely mess me up a lot. But even though they mentioned the possibility of this guy having yokai blood in him, he still counts as human, and as such he's got the same weaknesses as all the other humans. I don't want to repeat myself too much here, you know the drill. Even his air dashes can be turned against him if you manage to hit him during the attack. But even with his human imbalances, I can't say beating him has ever been too easy. And most importantly, it's enjoyable. I never played a Ninja Gaiden, which he's a reference to, but I still think it's cool they're tying the two universes together. Now Taka becomes a very simple boss once you learn him, since he doesn't have much in the way of combo variations. But even so, it's a fun fight every time. This is the kind of boss that makes me wish Dark Realm lasted longer, because that's where the fight gets fun. Without it, I feel his moveset is a little too basic. But the addition of overhead slams, the icicle explosions, and swift grabs add much needed variety. It's a solid boss with very few flaws, but at the same time, there's nothing too exciting there to make it stand out as a top tier fight. I decided to put both fights with Tokichiro in the same spot, even though they are fairly different. But I like both for the same reasons. Both are vital points in the story, with the first fight being the final confrontation between the two of you while he's still human, and the second one being the final fight against him as a yokai. In both encounters, he's very much a glass cannon. He can wreck you in an instant, but he doesn't have the strongest defense. But his offense is just really fun to deal with. He's not limited to just having the player's moveset. He feels as unique as many of the yokai fights, especially with some of his special abilities. The music too fits really well. I wish he lasted a bit longer because it's a lot of fun while it does. Benkei was really tough to rank because there's lots of different ways I've experienced the boss. One is with Split Staff, which makes this guy a complete joke. He goes down within a minute. Another is with Odachi, in which case he's a far more balanced fight. Then there's also the fact that fighting him in the main mission versus in the side mission is a completely different experience. In the main mission, the arena is way too small for a boss that requires a lot of spacing and moving around, but in the side mission it's perfectly fine. Fighting him with the Odachi in the side mission is the best way I've experienced him. That way he's genuinely great. This is why I made sure to mention that I'm ranking the bosses based on only my experiences, because just a different weapon can be enough to change everything. But in terms of his moveset, he's really good. My only issue is how long his pauses between each combo is. It's like 3 to 4 seconds each time. He has the potential to be really great, which is why I think he deserves to be at the top of the good tier. Enenra just barely made it to the great tier. He's easily the worst of the greats, but still great. One of the reasons I decided to give him a pass is because he's the second boss in the game and he does his job as that perfectly. What I like about his moveset is that it's really hard to tell when his combos end. You'd think that they end with the kick, and sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. So instead of just memorizing the moves, you have to be quick to think on your feet. The use of the pillars is great too, it adds planning and spacing into the fight. His visual design, animations and music are all good shit as well. He's also the first boss to punish you if you try to damage him when he's transitioning into Dark Realm or is recovering from a critical hit. More bosses should do that, honestly. Nagamasa is a great blend of human and yokai, and he feels unique from both. Unlike other yokai, he can deflect your attacks in phase 1, and unlike humans, he can fly, which leads to him doing an attack that to this day I have a hard time countering consistently. He does a burst attack and sends out projectiles at the same time, so the challenge is to burst counter him before those projectiles can reach you, which is easier said than done. Still, when done right, it feels great. Yeah, could you tell that I like the burst counters in this game? I really do. I really enjoy the Dark Realm phase of this boss in general. There's just this sense of elegance to his moveset, and the music adds a lot to it. It's my favorite soundtrack in the game by far, and I think he deserved it. On the other hand, Ryomen Sukuna really could have used a unique soundtrack instead of reusing Onryoki's from the first game, especially since that track was reused like 10 times in that game. But fortunately, his moveset is what's unique here. I like how his red and blue sides have different attacks and that you can choose which one you'd rather engage with. And even if you do focus on only one side, the other can still add in some attacks. The spinny melee attacks are pretty fun to deal with as well, and you have to be very precise with your dodges. I like his machine-like movements too. It's a well-animated boss with a cool design and a fun moveset to boot. Round 2 with the final boss is a well done refight. It's a much improved version of the previous battle with Otakemaru. He doesn't have as much pauses, he has more melee attacks, he doesn't spam AoEs as much, plus he now has pants. But the thing that makes him a worse boss than the original is the presentation. This is the first boss of the third DLC, and only one out of 2 bosses in that mission, yet the music sounds like a finale, which is what it was intended to be since it was made for the final boss of the main game. And what made that fight work was the constant changing of forms and scenery. It's just less epic here. These aren't major issues, don't get me wrong, the boss's moveset is still damn good. If they had used this fight as the final phase for the original Otakemaru, that boss would be fucking perfect. Shuten Doshi stands out for having a personality visible just from this one boss fight. He's a drunk who enjoys singing, dancing and killing, and all he wants from you is entertainment before killing you, and he'll be disappointed if you die too early. He also has a glorious main which he can use as a weapon. Unfortunately, even though the attack made me laugh the first time I saw it, it's probably the least interesting move he has. It just makes you stay away from him and wait until he's done. Still, it does look funny, so there's that. I also like how he stumbles around in the Dark Realm phase. He can barely stand up straight, but his moves are still readable enough. And it's great how one of his moves ends with him falling to the ground and you can do a critical hit if you're quick enough. It's a really good boss, but he could use some enhancements to become truly amazing. Because as it is, it's hard to imagine that he's supposed to be one of the most powerful yokai lore-wise. Kamaitachi is an example of an easy boss still being really fun. His defense is weak, probably to make up for his speed and how much he moves around, but goddamn can it be a thrill. Once again, I wish Dark Realm was like the entire fight because it's so good. When the boss summons copies of himself and they all do the spinny attack through the air, it's so fun to dodge. The boss just turning into a spinning top in the air is the best move. It requires taking the direction of your dodges into consideration too because of the slanted angle of the attack. The trees also add a lot. Kamaitachi can cut some of them down, you can use some for cover, and some he can climb on and attack from. It's really a great beast boss. And Nightmare Bringer is another boss that's really fun despite being kind of easy. But the problem is that this is the final encounter with Otakemaru and the final boss of the last DLC. It should have been harder. At first it was. I had a tough time figuring out how to avoid his massive sword swipes in the Dark Realm, but then I realized every attack can be avoided in high stance without much trouble. But if we just look at the boss in a vacuum and ignore his placement as the finale, he's great. Visually, it's eye candy. I like the combination of a giant beast with Otakemaru. Him summoning different elements on the ground and them changing the color of the floor is neat. And I have to give them props for making a giant boss work so well. It's never a nightmare for the camera. I like his moveset on the whole, and even if the challenge is lacking, thematically he's a great final boss. This guy is basically a Chad version of Asai Nagamasa, and like Nagamasa, he has one of the better themes in the game. And also like Nagamasa, he can fly. But the one thing that brings this fight down a bit for me is how inconsistent the Dark Realm phase can be. If you hit him while he's flying, he takes massive ki damage, but it's up to luck if he'll give you the chance to strike him while he's in the air. Sometimes he just spams the narrow line of blades, which is very easy to deal with and easy to punish. If he was more consistent, this could be an amazing tier boss. He's fast, but doesn't do absurd damage, he has long combos that are fun to dodge, and I like how he can summon his bird to attack you. And this attack will always make me cream. Do yourself a favor and use lightning resistance, or you'll end up hating this fight. If you take care of that, you'll get to treat yourself to a swift and thrilling encounter. And I have to reiterate how much this boss deserved its own theme more than Doman. It's a very unique fight from the rest too, since it's largely about avoiding lightning AoEs, which sounds boring, but it's really not. If this game had Dark Souls 2 speed, it would be awful, but Nioh running speed is perfect for this type of boss. Having to run away and run back in isn't really an issue at all. Another unique aspect to Lightning Guts of Yo Mama is how the weak spot changes throughout the fight. Sometimes it's on the head, sometimes the arms or legs. It changes how you attack this boss, and I like it. Okay, as much as I don't like the furry shit, I have to say, I'll take the game version of Kasha's tits over the folklore version any day. I've only ever heard people say two things about this boss. One is her appearance, obviously, and the other is her being an annoying fight. I don't see it. This fight is fucking fire. Her using a whip, flaming spinning tops, and riding these chariot wheels makes this one really stand out, even in a game with so many bosses. She's highly mobile, fast, and just pure fun. The only thing I'm iffy about is the tone. This is the mission where your Lord Nobunaga and his wife dies, and the whole castle is on fire. Yet the boss is this big titty cat waifu and the music sounds pretty cheerful. It doesn't make the boss any worse though, just makes me question the tone they were going for. Kashin Koji frustrates me because of how close they got to making this an amazing boss. He's one of the best sorcerer type bosses I've fought in a game, and usually they're more annoying than anything else. And even though he's a sorcerer, his melee attacks are some of the deadliest moves he has. Just when you think he's done attacking, he goes for another combo. But let's talk about what frustrates me about this guy. When I talked about Mizuki and Gozuki, I said it's good that they rarely try to do gang fights since they're not really good at it. But Kashin Koji has moments where he's a genuinely terrific gank. And that's in the final phase where he can summon a clone of himself to briefly do an attack. Two Kojis attacking at the same time works surprisingly well and isn't bullshit, but sadly he doesn't do it that much. Sometimes he spends most of the final phase just doing melee attacks, and that phase is very short anyway, so you might not even see him do it a single time. I wish they had doubled down on the gank here, it's the best part. And also, in the second phase he instead can summon an entire army of clones, which is by far his most dangerous ability. And it's also up to luck if he does it or not. So the fight is a little inconsistent, but if the stars align, it can be an amazing boss. Take everything good I said about the original Shutendoji and amp them up by times 10 and you have this absolute monster. He has more health than any other boss in the game, he does stupid damage, and he's far faster than before. Which is a good thing because it means the hair flip move no longer takes as long. He also has some added attacks, and his one weakness in the Dark Realm, which was him occasionally dropping to the ground, is now much harder to take advantage of. He gets up almost immediately, and if you were late by half a second, you'll get smacked by his club. He's the ultimate challenge in Nioh 2 for me, and I appreciate him for that. Especially because there's basically no run back to him, so even if I do die from his high damage, it doesn't really feel frustrating. Would be nice if he had new dialogue though, and maybe a bit less health. He's a beefy motherfucker. But either way, now he feels worthy of being one of the 3 most powerful yokai in existence. I enjoy Katsuya more every time I do it, and some of the things I used to dislike are now some of my favorite aspects about him, like his charges across the whole room. If you time your dodge at the last second, he'll always stop the charge there. But if you dodge too early, he'll just keep going. Same goes for his Dark Realm rampage. But with both attacks, there's one really fun trick you can do, which is to stand right in front of him and time an attack so you'll hit him just before he reaches you. If you do that, you can cut off a tusk from him and stop his charge, and it's really fun to pull off. Besides that, he's got great attack patterns. I love how he can chain his combos into burst attacks, grabs, hatchet tosses, or charges. If there's one boss in this game that really deserved to get a new soundtrack instead of reusing one, it's this guy. I feel something a bit more threatening would fit him better. Still, I fucking love this boss. Lady Raiko is without any doubt the best human boss in the game. Does she still suffer from the imbalance I've mentioned all throughout this video? Sure, a little bit. But fuck it, the fight is too fun for that to ruin it. I love how she can summon yokai that she's slain and use them as burst attacks on you. Her aggression is perfect, especially when she starts using her red sword. She'll sometimes just sprint straight at you and you know it's gonna hurt if you don't back away quick. I love all of her red glowy attacks in this phase. They're flashy, come in great variety and are fun to dodge. Then she activates her living weapon and holy fuck. She's maybe a little bit overpowered in this phase, but honestly, I love it. Maybe she could do a bit less damage or be a bit slower, but either way it gets the job done and my heart's always racing in this part. And one thing that adds balance to it is that if you're just patient and get quick hits in every now and then, she'll be out of key quickly. Also, what the fuck? Since when could she summon Kyuki? Utakimaru is such a wild ride of a boss. No other fight changes throughout as much as this. And while I disliked how Saito Yoshitatsu used the same yokai forms as the player, here it's done right. They don't share the exact same moveset with the player, they're well designed for a boss fight. And they're really fun, with maybe the exception of the Brute. I still like it, but I feel it's not as exciting as Feral and Phantom. And then he has a form of his own at half health. This is where I'm kind of conflicted. I love how many different elements he can use, and most of them are cool attacks, but he always has to pause for a while to change his element. On top of that, he doesn't have many melee attacks. Instead, he often strikes his sword into the ground and summons either an explosion, ice that chases you, or lightning covering a big area around him. The explosion is definitely the most annoying because it comes very suddenly, and you have to be far away or behind him to be able to avoid it. Again, I wish he had the DLC Utakimaru's moveset, then this would be perfect. But even still, the amount of variety, Tokichiro encouraging you, the music, the visuals, all come together to make a stellar final boss. Tate Eboshi is the most consistently great fight in the game. I adore her moveset from beginning to end. She's fairly simple to grasp, yet difficult to master. Just her basic scythe attacks are difficult, but you better learn them because they can kill you in 2 hits. Her Amrita-powered attacks are the best. With pretty much every single one of them, the timing and direction of your dodges have to be executed perfectly. But of course, Dark Realm is where it gets most exciting. Her attack patterns are relentless, they don't have long pauses, and she can do her devastating jump and slam attack after almost any of her attacks, so you always have to be on your toes. She also has great variety in her moves. It never gets tedious or predictable. For example, when she jumps on Amrita platforms, she can either immediately jump down and attack, or jump onto a second platform, then attack, or shoot projectiles and then attack. Like compare it to Tsushigumo, who can climb up on web. But he always does the same attack, so it becomes predictable. I can't really think of anything to complain about with this boss besides the damage. It's a little high. But besides that, fucking amazing. It's probably at the point where it's one of my favorite bosses of all time. And that's every noteworthy Nioh 2 boss ranked. I came back to this game after a long while, and back when I first played it, I was pretty shit. Coming back to it, I finally learned not to play it like it's Dark Souls. The gameplay clicked, and as a result, bosses like Tate Eboshi turned from frustrating obstacles into incredibly fun challenges. So, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, thanks for watching, and also, I didn't get early access to Elden Ring. Sad.